I remember sort of pushing my ear up to the door because it was supposed to be a bilingual meeting. So they're supposed to be able to go there and not speak French, right? Because, but I could hear that people on the other side of the door were speaking French. And I thought, this just isn't the right place for me.
I'm out of here.
Yeah, I should go. I should leave. This is a mistake. And I turned to leave, and a woman came out of, there was like a little elevator that opened, and I was just going to go down the stairs. And as the doors opened, she said something to me in French. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And she said in English, are you here for the meeting? And I said, yeah, but I actually think I can hear them speaking French. I don't know if this is the right place for me. And she sort of scooped me up by my arm. She linked her arm with mine, and she said, you can sit next to me.
Well, welcome to the show today, folks. So we have a very special guest, Lauren Windle. Lauren is from London. I came across Lauren through internet, some podcast. I'd seen her testimony, and I ended up reading her book. She is an author. This is Notes on Love. We'll speak about that later. But Lauren has really a very dramatic experience with the Lord, and her struggles with addiction, and how she overcame that with community, with church, and just surrounding herself with people. So it's going to be a great show today. So I'm sure you want to stay tuned. So thank you for being on today, Lauren.
Oh, thank you for having me. I loved that. I feel like you've already got the sort of key points all lined up. It's like hearing someone tell me it back. Maybe you don't need me. You can just
No. Let's start off at the beginning here, Lauren. I know that your mom was a Christian, and she carried you to church when you were young. And
yeah, she did. And Christian values were really central in our house, and it was really important to her that she communicated her heart for Jesus to us. And she took us to church, and we were christened in a sort of Church of England church, and then later we went to a Baptist church, and we were part of that congregation. I was given the choice at about the age of 13 if I wanted to keep going to church or if I wanted to stay at home, or, mum felt that at that stage I knew enough and I was, independent enough that I could stay at home without her on a Sunday if I wanted to. And I have a sister who's about 18 months older than me, and we basically made different choices. She decided she wanted to stay. She had a great community. She really got on well with the people in that church. But for me, I didn't. I really struggled with it, and I really liked Christ and this idea of all of that. But I had some really negative experience with Christians. And I think I just thought maybe this isn't for me. So I took a step back and I stopped going to church. And that was it. So I was sort of a teenager with a Christian mum who prayed for me and did her best to direct me back towards the Lord. But I had other things I was more interested in.
Yeah, at 13, it's easy to make the decision not to want to go to church. What were some of the negative experiences that you had with church or with leadership?
Yeah, it's a funny one. In many ways, I was really loved and cared for very well. But there were a few, I grew up in central London, and parts of London are really fancy and really, really, posh and rich and all of that kind of stuff. But some areas are quite deprived and quite difficult, and people have difficult lives and lifestyles. And I found that I was it was in quite what we would say like a bit of a dodgy area, I suppose, at the time. And at one point I was beaten up at my church youth group, and there was somebody from my Sunday school who, if I saw them like at the bus stop, they would check my pockets to see if there's anything that they could steal from me. But in those instances, we're talking about children, people who were my age, who were deeply flawed and actually now have gone on from strength to strength and are in a great place and would never behave in that way now. When it came to the leadership, there was one pastor who I was aware of who left his wife for a woman in the congregation, and there were youth leaders who sometimes were a bit inappropriate. And I know lots of different churches have experienced people who work out their sort of power and authority in ways that aren't very godly, and that's been really damaging. And I definitely felt that. And I also felt quite judged by Christians. I felt unwelcome and on the outside because I wasn't perfect. And we didn't have many sort of frank conversations about the fact that no one's perfect, and that's the point. And I sort of just saw what everyone showed me as being these amazing people who were constantly getting it right, and I just thought, well, I'm not good enough for this. I should leave. I'm never going to be up to their standard. And at the same time as I was having those thoughts and those conversations, the world started bringing me things which to a young teenager felt way more exciting.
At 13, you made the decision to leave the church, and
mm-hmm.
when you leave something, you always go to something else. So I think you started smoking and drinking at a young age, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I really did. And every time I speak, I say like, oh, where I grew up, it was really normal for young people to drink. But actually, I think that there are lots of places.
Yeah.
It's not so specific to.
Pretty normal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
So we
normal
would
in Texas.
yeah, there you go. Teenagers, they do their best. They get their hands on whatever they can get their hands on. And we would go to the park or wherever and we would drink. And the problem with that is that I was somebody who was drinking for, I mean, if there are right reasons, I was drinking for all the wrong reasons. I was drinking because I felt like ultimately what was at the base of it was fear. And I wouldn't have known that at the time. I wouldn't have had the language to put to it. But I was so desperate to be popular. I was so desperate to be liked. I felt really socially anxious when I turned up with groups of friends. But then I had this alcohol thing. And I was like, okay, this is super helpful. This is actually great, and it didn't mean that those problems were gone, but it meant that I didn't have to think about them as much. I didn't have to engage with them. And that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted to forget. So yeah, and alcohol just presented a great way to do that. And the thing is, there were other people who were drinking lots as well, and who would maybe drink so much that they threw up or whatever. But when it came to it and they went to university and they got their degree or they got a good job or whatever, they stepped away from it because they were able to. It was a phase for them, whereas it was a solution for me. And it's very hard to tell the difference when you're a teenager and everyone's doing it. But it's when you get older and some people course correct and they go, okay, I tried that. I've grown up now. I don't need that. Actually, I'd rather not have the hangovers. And I want to be successful in my job and actually probably engage a bit more with my faith. So I'm going to stop that. Whereas I didn't do that. I wanted more. And that meant that those sort of people who had that sensible framework of, okay, I've done my immature phase, they weren't the ones who had grown up, weren't the ones I wanted to spend time with. I wanted to spend time with the other people who still relied on alcohol like I did. So I ended up with a group of friends who were really unhealthy, who were looking to fill a gap. And they would do that through drinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, as an addiction specialist, there's no problem that alcohol can't solve, is there?
Well, that is certainly the mindset. Yeah, that's it. Drown it out and then it'll be fine. I think, yeah. And then obviously I went to college, to university, and in those sort of college years again, and I'm from my friends who've been to college in the States, I understand that this is quite similar.
Yes, it is.
Everything, the framework is just around alcohol.
All of the events and games, sports, everything,
Yeah. There's drinking everywhere. And that means that if you are someone who's drinking in that sort of alcoholic way, again, you're hiding in plain sight because everyone's focused on drinking. That's normal. You're abnormal if you say you're not drinking that night.
Yeah.
You're the one who needs to answer for that. Whereas if you're like, whoa, as much as I possibly can, people are like, yeah, one of us. And I just wanted to be one of us. I wanted to be part of that group. So yeah, I didn't have a community I felt a part of. So being that party girl, being that person who drinks, being that person who's really fun that was where I decided my identity would be.
And then, of course, alcohol, it never leads to drugs, does it?
No, see, that's the good thing about alcohol. It keeps itself to itself. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, once I was in that lifestyle, and it was actually after, we would say university, but after those college years, that I had a boyfriend through that time as well, and he was pretty destructive, and he had his own issues around substances and around his mental health and things. And he broke up with me around the time I finished my degree and I had graduated. And that meant that I had this framework. I lived in a shared house with some women, some friends. And I had this degree, and I knew what I was doing each day. I was going in and I was doing my lectures or studying, whatever. And I had this boyfriend, and suddenly all of that was gone. And it was like, well, I've just got this party girl thing left. So I got a job working in hospitality, and I worked in events management and marketing and all of those things. And I thought that was really fabulous and really tied in with that sort of personal brand of party girl that I created.
Mhm.
But in that lifestyle, there were people with far more money, far more they were older than me. Often I would have been 22 when I started that job. People were more around 30, and people all took cocaine, and that was just inbuilt in that lifestyle.
What was the first experience? What did it feel like when you took your first line of coke?
Yeah, I remember I remember the first time I had any, and that was when somebody had left some out on the table. And I thought, well, I wonder what this is like. So while no one was looking, I sort of dabbed a little bit, and I'd seen people rub it on their gums, or so I tried. And actually, I didn't really feel anything. And I just thought, okay, well, that's just, I've done it then, whatever. And I think I didn't feel anything because I was quite drunk, and I probably didn't actually get much of a quantity on my finger anyway.
Mhm.
But then the next time someone offered me a line of cocaine, to my mind, I was like, well, I've done it, so it doesn't matter. That's a bridge I've crossed. So doing it again, it's not like it's the first time. But actually, there was something very different that sort of when I actually took an amount that would make any sort of difference, and I did a line of cocaine, and I remember thinking, like, I actually don't like this. I remember my heart really racing, and I couldn't sleep afterwards, and I'd like lying in bed with my heart pounding and things. And I just thought, like, okay, well, look, it's a rite of passage. You try a drug, and maybe it's not for you, and that's fine.
Just move
Um,
on.
yeah, like to tick off the bucket list. It's a life experience. Everyone does it once. That was what I told myself. But then, so the third time I took it, and this is when I think things really changed. I was in a bar with somebody I worked with, and they were quite senior compared to me, and they offered me cocaine because they had some on them, and I said no. And then they went off to the bathroom to take some cocaine, and whilst they were away, I thought, no, I do want to. And I had this sort of internal conversation with myself. I was like, you didn't really enjoy it last time you took it. Like, why do you want to do it again? And I just thought, I don't know, I just do. And I took it, and I walked off to the toilet. And I honestly, that was the first time I thought to myself, this is something that you actually don't like, but you're still doing it. And I really think it was after that.
Hmm.
After that, that's when the habit started. And I stopped having that conversation with myself, because I knew it was inevitable. I was going to do it,
Hmm.
and things really spiraled after that really quickly.
Well, it was enabling to you in the beginning, I believe,
Mm,
because you could still drink in excess, and
yeah,
the coke kind of helped you function with your work
yeah,
and so forth.
yeah. That's actually something I didn't realize until I sort of started getting into it, and I realized that when I had just been drinking, I could black out or throw up. There was something in cocaine that meant that I stayed far more coherent, even though I was drinking the same amount. So I could still have like conversations and things, and they would be circular conversations. I'd say the same thing over and over again, but I wasn't slurring. I wasn't that sort of embarrassing drunk, that person who actually just had to go to bed because they could no longer talk or function. It kept me functioning. So it meant I could drink more. And that was, the party didn't have to end suddenly, and that for me was brilliant, because I was always afraid that it had to end. I was always afraid that I would run out of drink or cigarettes or cocaine, or of people, that everyone would leave the party and go home and go to bed, and I'd be sitting there on my own. It was just, the funny thing about certainly cocaine for me in my experience was that nothing was ever enough. It's like that depiction of hell, right? Where everyone's got an itch and no one can scratch it. You cannot talk enough, you can't smoke enough, you can't drink enough, you cannot take too much cocaine.
Yeah.
There's nothing that satisfies what you're doing. You just want to keep going. And it meant that, like, I was always conscious that when the sun came up, when it started to get light, people would think, oh, we should stop now, it's the next day, and people would leave. So I'd do my best to like black out blinds, like, you know, almost like a Vegas casino, like stop. Like, I didn't want to break the spell. I didn't want people to realize. And actually something that I would play music because I was terrified of the sound of the birds in the morning, because the birds would start making noises before the sun came up. And when I heard that, that was like the alarm going, this is going to end soon. And it would, you know, even now I can feel myself feeling panicky, like at the thought of the sound of the birds, you know, because it was also, it was a sign that I'd gone too far and I was still awake. And I had done something I promised myself I wouldn't do again. And here I was doing it again. And sometimes I was doing it with another person there, and sometimes, or people, or as part of a party. And sometimes I was just sitting up on my own, you know, and that became a sort of perpetual lifestyle where in the morning I would have such resolve, I'm not going to do this again. And then the nighttime would come round and suddenly that would just dissolve away. And I just felt so trapped. But I didn't have the language to know that. I couldn't see that I was living in a cage I built around myself, because I actually couldn't see beyond the walls of it. I just thought everyone was miserable and everyone did different things just to get by day by day. And for me, that was drugs. And that's it. And if I gave up the drugs, I'd still be miserable, but there'd just be no drugs. So what's the point in that? You know, I might as well continue enjoying the thing that I'm using to help me deal with the misery that everyone feels in life, and pour them that they don't have the solution I do, because at least I've got something and they're probably just out there flailing, you know. And that's it. That's and I, you know, if I had prayed in that time, and I think from time to time in desperation, when I was drunk or high, I did, you know, I wouldn't have known what to pray for, because I didn't know what life could be like on the other side of it. I thought that the world was as small as the world I was living in, you know, and that's actually really sad. I think that's such a shame for people trapped in any kind of addiction, is that they think that what's on the other side of that addiction is like equally rubbish but different, and it's not, you know. And that's something that it took me a long time to realize.
So at this point, after you've been using coke for about a year, you started having some physical issues. It's blacking out, waking up with a black eye, missing your best girlfriend at her father's funeral, I believe it was, and her mother had actually died 6 months earlier, but you missed the funeral because of the drug habit. So it started taking its toll.
In many ways. And those social things were definitely there, and I distanced myself from my family and I let down my friends, and particularly that friend. And that's something I've had to make amends for later down the line. And I wasn't present. I wasn't like, I remember one of my friends, we'd all been at a party, and she was staying over because she was there with her kids. It was like a fun, lots of different families there. And I, with like one or two other people, stayed up all night taking drugs. And I was in the kitchen away from, you know, the kids and whatever. But the kids had gone to bed at 7 or 8 o'clock, whenever you put kids to bed. But they'd woken up, as kids do, at 6 a.m., come bursting in to watch cartoons in the kitchen. And the mum, who had also gone to bed at a normal time, came in, saw what we had been doing, and ushered her kids away from me. And I remember thinking, I'm not safe for children. And of course you would do that. You know, I that is not a stupid thing of her to do. But that really hit me as well. Like, I want to be a person who people are excited to leave their kids around, who's fun and who's wholesome. And I'm not even safe for them to come over in the morning and say hi, because they don't realize that actually, who knows, I've been up all night and I'm high and drunk, and it's awful. And I also had physical symptoms. I got nosebleeds and I got numbness in my fingers and toes. And I actually developed, bearing in mind all of this is so that I can be this popular party girl. And I developed like a facial twitch that would just jump on my face when I started drinking. So I looked unwell. I looked really unwell, and I wasn't washing properly. I wasn't opening my mail. I had bills stacking up and court summons because I wasn't paying them and all of these kinds of things. And I just stopped being a functioning adult and started just getting by every day until the point that I could take drugs. And it was miserable, absolutely miserable.
Fortunately, you had some, I guess, roommates that kind of intervened. They saw the downward spiral. I think you were in Paris at this time.
Yeah. So I had made a few positive changes, and actually moving city is something, it's a classic. It's like in recovery, you'd say it's a geographical, you think the problem is your surroundings and not you. So I did that. I said, okay, London's the problem. It's these friends, it's this job, it's these drug dealers, whatever. If I get away from all of this, that's when I'll be fine. So I had a few friends who lived in Paris, and I thought, brilliant. And this is years before Emily in Paris was a thing, but it was that sort of mindset of I'm going to go over there and live this sort of romantic dream life, and I won't take the drugs. And I got there, and actually, I couldn't speak French and I didn't know how to get drugs in a new country or anything. So I did drink very heavily, but for a while I wasn't taking drugs. And I drank like, yeah, I was drinking most days, I'd say, and was often not functioning very well in the daytimes, and wasn't doing very well with work things I was doing and all of that stuff. And it was about 9 months into me moving where my friends sat me down and said, look, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep seeing you say that you're not going to do something like drink, and by then I'd started to be able to find the drugs and worked out where I could get it. Like I just had a radar for people who were taking drugs and gravitated towards them. And they said, we are worried that you're going to continue to spiral here when you moved here to make positive changes. So we'd like you to go to a support group meeting for cocaine addicts. And we found one, and here it is. And we just don't feel that we can keep doing this with you, keep doing this cycle of promises and regret, and then just letting yourself down and making that decision again, the wrong decision again. So we want you to get support from other people who know what this is like. And I found, if I'm honest, I was really annoyed because I didn't want to be challenged. I wanted to keep going, sort of doing what I was doing. I mean, I didn't want to keep doing what I was doing, but I also didn't want to make a drastic change, like stopping doing what I was doing. That would have been crazy to me. And I felt a bit judged by them, and I felt like they weren't really being very good friends. But I thought, I will shut them up by going to this meeting. If I go, then I can say, look, I went and it wasn't for me. What can I do? I gave it my best shot. Thank you for trying. And I thought it might buy me some time, basically. And I walked up to this meeting, and often you can go to meetings, recovery meetings for people who are drug addicted, or in recovery from drug addiction, I should say. And it can be, depending on where you are, it can be quite male, and it can often be people who are a little bit older than I was at the time. I was 25 at the time. So you could walk into those rooms and you can often find like 70% men, and most people are around the 50 mark.
Yeah.
And this is, to my mind, this is God, because I walked in and it was all women in their 20s. And there was like 6 of them. It was quite a small sort of group, and they were all about 3 months sober. So it was just within touching distance what they had. And they were really welcoming. And I remember sort of pushing my ear up to the door, because it was supposed to be a bilingual meeting. So they're supposed to be able to go there and not speak French, right? Because, but I could hear that people on the other side of the door were speaking French. And I thought, this just isn't the right place for
I'm out of
me.
here. Yeah.
Yeah, I should go. I should leave. This is a mistake. And I turned to leave, and a woman came out of, there was like a little elevator that opened, and I was just going to go down the stairs. And as the doors opened, she said something to me in French. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And she said in English, are you here for the meeting? And I said, yeah, but I actually think I can hear them speaking French. I don't know if this is the right place for me. And she sort of scooped me up by my arm. She linked her arm with mine, and she said, you can sit next to me. And actually, like, oh, just so grateful for that gesture, and she introduced me to everyone, and everyone shared a little bit of, where they were at that day, and but also a wider sort of their story. And I just cried. And being in that space where I heard people say things that I had never said to anyone out loud, but I related to so much, knowing I wasn't the only one who'd felt that way or said that thing or done that thing. And it was revelatory to me. It was almost like a magic trick. I felt like they had played a trick on me, and they had gone into my brain and pulled out my thoughts, and then they were saying them like they were their own. And actually just knowing that other people had felt that way and that they had taken positive steps made such a difference to me. And I saw something in them that I wanted. And I said to them, look, I want to stop taking cocaine. I want to stop taking drugs. Do I have to stop drinking? And the best thing they ever did.
You're trying to bargain already with them, huh?
I know. I was looking for an inch. I was trying to find my shades of gray. I was honestly like, what can I keep? And they didn't give me any of that. And they said, no, we believe that you will not be successful if you keep drinking. We can't tell you what to do, but no, you should stop drinking. And I called my sister, and my sister's like in the sort of prodigal story. She's the one who stayed in church, and she's amazing, and all of that stuff. And I'm the one who went off and then came back. And I said to her, they said I should stop drinking as well. And she didn't skip a beat. She said, do it. I think that will be the proudest, the best decision that you've made in your whole life. And I never drank again. And I never had a last drink. I never had a last night out. I didn't wait until after my birthday or after that wedding or after that thing. I just stopped. And I think that's a really important thing to say as well, because a lot of people go, okay, I'll do it on Monday. I'll do it on New Year's Eve. I'll do it at the start of the next month. Actually, you will always find a reason to push it back. And it was just me doing it that meant that I got into a healthier space. That, if I had tried to push it down the road, I'd still be kicking the can now. I never would have done it. So I'm really pleased that they were so certain with me. And I just said, okay, I'll try it today. And then I tried it the next day. And then I was like, okay, let's see if I can do 3 days of this. And at first it was like white knuckling. It was like I was clinging on for all I could. And I remember thinking the days are so long when you're not drinking. Like, what do people do with all of this morning that they're not sleeping through? And what do people do in the evenings when they're like not drunk? And suddenly I had all of this time, and I was just watching the clock thinking, when it gets to about 9-10 o'clock, I can go to bed. And then that's it. I survived it. I've done a full day, and I was just waiting. And it was probably like a month or so after that I was like, oh, hang on, I haven't checked the time to see if I've made it through today. I've just lived today, and slowly I started to feel that peace, that, slowly I started to ease my grip on it. But it was a journey, and it was really difficult. And it was 5 days after I went into that meeting that I walked into a church. And I think that having a community of people in recovery, and then also having that framework of the church, people say to me, can you get sober without knowing people in recovery and without going to those meetings and stuff like that? And then some people say, well, can you get sober without the church? And like, yeah, probably, but I wouldn't have wanted to try without either. I do not know where I'd be if I hadn't gone into the church. The two worked perfectly together to give me the support network that I need. And I'm really grateful for both.
So you were doing the AA program, and it got down, is it step 3, your higher power, as they call it?
Yeah, that's it. That's why I went to church. Yeah. So I went, it was on my third day of sobriety, and somebody shared about their higher power. And in these meetings, they don't say that you have to be Christian. They don't say you have to be anything, but they do say that you have to acknowledge a higher power. You have to acknowledge that there is one, and you have to acknowledge it's not you. And somebody said, and I think the person who was sharing their higher power might have been like nature, or I don't know. It was something, it wasn't the sort of Christian Jesus God.
Right.
And I remember him saying to me, well, you've got to work out what your higher power is. And obviously, my mum had taken me to church, and that was the last time I remembered really engaging with anything spiritual. So I thought, well, this is where I'll start on this journey. I'll turn up at a church and I'll see. So I just Googled English speaking church in Paris, and I went to the first one that came up. And I went and turned up, and the vicar said, the pastor, who was American actually, because it was run by an American church group, and he came and he said, oh, well, if anybody wants prayer for anything, come and speak to me. And I went up to the front and I said, I'd like prayer. I'm a drug addict, an alcoholic, and I've just stopped, and I'm 5 days clean. And you could see on his face, he was like, oh, okay. And it was the sort of like, activate emergency procedure 1. He was like, this is not a drill. And he asked me to sit down, and he said, I'm going to invite another couple to join us and pray, if that's okay. And man and his wife came over, and I explained a little bit more about the story that I've just told you. And the woman laid a hand on me, and they prayed for me, and they invited me to a women's Bible study group, and they talked me through this prayer of sort of repentance and inviting Jesus into my life. And I didn't really understand it, but it felt like it was important to them, so I did it. And I didn't really understand the gravity of that sort of accepting Jesus. But at that time I was like, I'll try anything.
Yeah.
I'm open. Just tell me how this works. And I think, and the church was amazing, but what really connected with me, what really made a difference, I think, in my day-to-day journey, was that I went to a women's Bible study group that met Tuesday night, and there they just loved me back to life, I think,
Mm.
so they didn't judge me. And a lot of them didn't know. The vicar's wife knew that I was in recovery, and the woman who ran the group knew, because she was the woman who had come over and prayed for me that first day. But I didn't share it with the wider group. And they really helped me unpick the resentment that I felt because of some of the things that, we spoke about before, about when I was younger in church, some of the ways I'd seen people in leadership behave, and that I'd felt judged, and that I hadn't been cared for in the way I would have liked in those sort of Sunday school and stuff. And actually the vicar's wife, I remember really clearly, I said all of that, and I was almost a bit angry. I was like, well, actually, I don't know if Christians are that great. I've seen this, I've seen that, and people have said that, and, are they even that great? And she just said, I'm sorry. She was like, I just need you to know, I know that wasn't me personally, but I need you to know that I am so sorry that that's what you've been shown, and that's how you've been treated. And please give us a chance to show you what this should be like, to show you what being a Christian, being a person of faith, loving Jesus, let us show you how you should have been treated. And I just felt this weight off me in that moment. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give this a go. And then she said, oh, turn to your Bibles. And I said, I don't have a Bible. And again, that was like panic. I'm going to get you a Bible. I can't believe, I'm so sorry. And actually the next Sunday in church, the pastor came over to me and said, I just want to apologize that I didn't give you a Bible last week. So it was just so kind. And they discipled me, and they were very gentle, because at that time as well, I'd given up the drugs, I'd given up the drinking, but I still smoked. And there are lots of churches that would have really condemned me for that, really told me off, and, oh, Christians don't smoke, don't do that. But they could see that I was on a journey, and I wasn't instantly going to correct everything. And they encouraged me to make healthier choices. but they didn't ever come down hard on me about that. And it was maybe a year and a half or so after I started my faith journey that I stopped smoking, because that's when I really felt challenged to by God. And that's when it felt right. But before that, it was almost like we kind of had bigger fish to fry, even if some of those things weren't as obvious as me lighting up a cigarette and smelling of smoke and all of that stuff, you know. But actually, I loved the sort of the wisdom and the discernment of that, not to come in all guns blazing with the obvious things that I was clearly still doing wrong, but just to love me and show me Jesus, and then work, you know, and be in support as Jesus as Jesus prompted me to make those changes, you know. And I think I needed that, because I think if I'd walked in and they'd been like, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're not good enough with that, I would have just left again, because that's how I'd felt all those years ago, you know.
Yeah.
So that was really special, and that community walked with me until I got baptized, a year and a half later, and that was amazing. And they all sang "Oh Happy Day" as I came out of the water, which was lovely, you know.
Praise God. Well, it's great that you had such a positive experience with that particular group, and it wasn't like it was in childhood, teenage
Yeah.
years to see that. I think it was Gandhi that said, I think in the beginning he had read the New Testament or read the scriptures many times. I mean, just pouring through it, just, you know, devouring the word of God. And he couldn't wait to meet a Christian. And he said, "Can I touch you?" He says, "Christianity is the only religion where God comes to live inside of you." And he was just so overwhelmed with that thought. It was like, can I just, you know, can I touch you? Unfortunately, you know, once he met some Christians, was not very impressed at all with the Christian. He was impressed with Christ and the Word of God, but the Christians he met obviously did not represent Christ well.
Yeah. Well, and there's, you know, there's got to be grace for that. Of course, we're human, we all flaw, we all, you know, we're all flawed, we're all sin. But but it is that, isn't it? I think also we have to manage our expectations of each other. But there are, you know, being welcoming, being gracious, showing that hospitality, that forgiveness, that grace, that mercy that Jesus showed. I think plenty of us could do more to grow in that, you know,
Yeah.
so that we're sort of pointing more to Jesus. But yeah.
Grow in grace and knowledge. I remember a story. You went into a Christian bookstore and you, gosh, Lauren, you know, I mean, I don't know what you were thinking. You went into a Christian bookstore to get some, you know, books on faith and Christ and so forth. And the clerk was not impressed with you, girl.
No, I went in and I asked. So I was 19 at this point, so I could see that things were going downhill for me. And I was really sort of just trying to reach out, trying to work out like what this was all about. And you know, as we know, I hadn't been in church now for 6 or so years, and I was growing into adulthood. And I just thought, I can see I'm doing things wrong. I'm smoking, I'm drinking, I'm all of this stuff. And I went in and I asked for a book on sin. And she said I was too young to have a book on sin. So she gave me a picture book about who Jesus was. And then I did end up picking up a book on sin, which she wasn't very impressed by. But then as I left, she said, you know, Christians don't dress like that. And you know, it just felt like another nail in the coffin for me,
Yeah.
you know, like, okay, just another way that I'm not stacking up, that I'm not good enough. I'm not dressed, you know, how I'm supposed to be dressed. You know, I was in jeans and a tank top. I mean, it doesn't matter what I was wearing. That's not the way to love people into, you know, faith. And maybe I could have been dressed differently, but I also wasn't dressed in any kind of outrageous. I wasn't in like skimpy club wear, you know. I was But that's, you know, she has her own journey to go on. So there we go.
So moving on, so you're a year and a half into this or so, and
Yeah.
you decide to move back from Paris to come back home to London, and you know
Yeah.
you were getting stable there. I think you said I can't remember if it was in your book or what, but you knew more drug dealers than you did Christians in London. So this was kind of you're kind of stepping into it again, not
Yeah.
because a lot of people I know, a lot of people, they relapse when they walk back into situations. They think, I'm going to get
Mm,
away, whether it's Paris or whether it's,
mm,
California or New York, let's run here. But when we come back, it's my
mm.
network, it's my
Yeah.
buddies, it's my friends, and oh yeah, here you go, Lauren, here you go. So,
Yeah.
but you thrive.
Well, yeah, and actually, I think I was very conscious of that. And I had a sponsor in Paris, and I carried on chatting to her online, like on Skype and stuff like that. And I also had like a counselor, like a therapist, and I carried on chatting to her online as well, even after I left. So I had lots of very healthy people speaking into my life, and I didn't move in on my own somewhere. I didn't get a place on my own. I didn't move in with like any of my friends from before. I moved in with my sister and her husband, and they had a young baby by then as well. So the household wasn't set up partying. It would have been difficult, I certainly couldn't bring people back for drinks, and like that's completely unreasonable. And I remember in the first week that I moved back, being really annoyed with my sister. She woke me up at 5 a.m. and I just thought, come on, what are you doing? She just pushed my door open and I woke up and I was like, I'm trying to sleep. And I hate it when people disturb my sleep. And I confronted her about this later in the morning when I'd finally actually woken up. And I was like, why did you wake me up at 5 a.m.? And she said, I just wanted to check you were still here,
Mhm.
because so many years, you know, I would have gotten up in the middle of the night or have gone out and just not, and I felt really challenged by that actually. I was so annoyed that she'd woken me up, but actually she just needed to be sure. And every now and again she would do that just to make sure that I hadn't gone back. And I think having that network, and my mum praying for me and my sister praying for me and my dad, who's had a different and slightly difficult journey with faith, but even so, he said he was praying for me,
Yeah.
and that was huge for me. And just I made a decision to sort of surround myself with good people who cared about the best for me. And I kind of didn't go back into those same friendship circles. And very quickly I started going to church. And I knew one Christian, and I went to the first church I tried was Hillsong, and I know that you've got a few Hillsongs in America as well, the sort of Australian mega church type. And I went there a few times, and like the music was great, and people were very friendly, but it was so big. The one in London was like, 4 services, like 5,000 people across the services. And I felt like I wanted something a little bit smaller. And a friend of a friend then took me to a more community church, which had sort of 150 people. And I ended up going there for 6 or 7 years. And I've only recently started going to a church nearer to where I live. And I loved it. And again, I found that community. And this time it was slightly different because there were lots of people who were my age. Whereas at the other church, it was, a bit more, it was very diverse in the age ranges, and there were lots of families and things like that. So it felt like a massive hug from extended family at that church, whereas this one felt like a massive hug from a group of friends. And I think that was really valuable. And again, Christians aren't perfect, and it's not like these friends were, all of them were like the ideal. There are challenges, and everyone's on their own journey, but having a consistent group who showed up for me. And then it was about a year after I moved back and I got myself established with that church and gotten so well with the church leadership that I spoke to them about setting up a recovery program from the church to offer out to other people who were struggling with addiction. And that became almost like a new step in my journey, because like it was such a steep learning curve trying to work with people who were in active addiction, people who were already in recovery, people who were, and trying to sort of, it's actually, it's funny because I mean, and this will really resonate. The highs are so high when you're working with people in recovery, but the lows are so low. It's so disappointing when you really felt like someone was on a good track, and then they have a slip or they relapse, and you can see the negative consequence of that. You can see the internal struggle they're having with themselves. And also, you know, it teaches you like not to get annoyed with people as much, because I found that people would make really strong declarations, and I did the same. You know, this is going to end here. Today is the day. And they're not lying, because they really believe it. But you have to also pad that declaration out with good circumstances, a good living situation, with a good support network. And people often don't have all of those things in place. So it can get a bit unstable, and it can be very difficult, and can mean that they don't end up sticking to that resolution. And just learning to like continuously show up for people who 9 times out of 10 may say they're going to do something that they end up not doing, or that they do end up doing when they said they wouldn't, and things. And it's a real challenge. And there are practical things as well. We had people who came from all kinds of addictive backgrounds. So some people who wanted to face a porn addiction, or wanted to face a food addiction, or, you know, substances, and had a similar story to me. And you know, we had one of the men so kindly brought in a big tray of chocolate brownies that his wife had made for everyone and handed them round. And I was like, oh gosh, no, because there are people here for whom that's a huge problem. That's like you turning up with a bottle of wine for some people, you know. And managing that, and managing just such incredible intentions. But we, you know, it was a trial and error situation that needed a huge amount of prayer cover, huge amount of accountability for the leadership. But again, like those highs, when they, and I don't think high is quite the right word, but the wins, the joy, you know. And on the last session of the course, we'd all sit down and have dinner together, and it would be an opportunity for people to say, like, you know, a highlight or something they'd learned. And hearing the stories, you know, like one woman on the first session, her partner had said, I'll come and pick you up. I'll come and drive and get you from the church and drive you home because it's late. She said, no, don't. And she only said no, don't, because she wanted to go via an off license so she could get a bottle of vodka, just a small sort of, well, not that small, but, you know, one like that. She would drink it on the 20-minute walk home, and then it'd be done by the time she got home, so she wouldn't have to go in the house with it. That was her plan. And she told me that before she left. She was like, I've told him not to pick me up. I'm going to get some vodka. And I was like, okay, you know, is there something else you could do? You know, and we talked a bit about it. And the next week I came in and I said, like, you know, how was your walk home? And she said, it was good. I stopped at the fish and chip shop. And I was like, wow. Yes. And she's still sober today. And she came back. And she came back as a leader on the course to walk other people through their journeys of sobriety as well. And those moments are like, you would have 1,000 disappointment moments to hear that someone went to the chip shop, you know. And it's the closest thing I can imagine heaven being like, is those moments when you just see someone in a new layer of freedom that they hadn't experienced before, you know. And we do that with a 12-step program, but we bring the Bible and Jesus into it as well. And we do the two together.
Yeah, that's powerful. Yeah, I was listening to someone that does addiction specialist, and quite well known, quite accomplished, I guess. And he said, by all metrics, he said, I would be considered a failure because my success rate's maybe 5 to 10%. And it really hit me when he said that. Is that about the numbers that you see?
Yeah. Well, yeah. First week we get, like, say 50 people turn up, and then the second week you're down to 40, and it slowly tapers because, you know, it's tough. It's really tough. It's, you know, going through recovery is really confronting. It's introspective. It requires a level of brutal honesty that's really painful to some people. And it's just, it's really difficult. But the people who stick it out, like they have life in its fullest. You know, they have new life that they just never could have expected. And I do believe that for people who put in that work, Jesus shows up like in abundance, and it's just a privilege to see. But 100%, if it was a corporate business, they would have shut us down years ago, because but actually what I love as well is that sometimes I'll get a message from someone who came to one session. They came and they never showed up again, and I'm like, okay, you can lead a horse to water, that's fine. We provided the space and they're not ready. And then I'll get an email from them and they'll say something like, I came once and I struggled with it and I wasn't 100% sure, but I kept at it and I ended up going to another meeting on a different side of town. And I just want to say thank you, because that was the push I needed. And they've spent 2 years getting sober somewhere else, but they just wanted to say thank you, because that was like a brick in the wall that became their recovery. And each of those bricks is so important. And maybe you could afford to lose one or two, but actually you need all the bricks to build your wall. And I'm happy if it's just been one. I'm happy if it's been 10. But if it's just an extra little thing building up to what becomes your recovery, it's worth it,
Yeah, it's powerful when you see a success story like that. A friend that I told him, I said, you had every chance. God gave you every chance to walk away. So he sees a homeless man. At the time he was single, he sees a homeless man, decides to take him. Okay, first he carries him to a cafe, feeds him. The guy's unfolding his story. He says, well, I'm homeless. I'm homosexual. I'm HIV positive. And I'm like, you've got every red flag. You should have ran. You should have ran. But he took the man into his house and he lived with him for 2 months. And he just did everything, cared for him, fed him. His network of friends began to, it's a dozen people, okay, Lauren, here's $25, go get a meal, or, they just all a real support group. But he ended up just going back into drugs and, back into his lifestyle of turning tricks on the streets. And so he thought, well, this is the end of it. But about 6 months later, he gets an email from the man, and he says, I have graduated. I've been in this program for 6 months. And he said, I would love for you to come see me graduate.
Wow. Yeah.
I'll go. And it was interesting. He got there and he said, it's just amazing how God showed his love to that one man. He said, there was a dozen other men in this city who were doing just like I did. But he said he had all these people. He said, it's amazing how the love of God just kept chasing that man down till he finally really got right and got serious about it. But yeah.
That's it. And it's so easy to feel disheartened when you see somebody going out, but actually going back out, but actually you just don't know what's happening. And I remember really early, the first time I sort of said I had an issue with addiction, I said it to my sister and she took me to a church. And I said to her afterwards, I was like, I don't get it. Like, they seem like nice people, but this is not for me. Like I think that they do good things and they run charities and they support the homeless. And I love that. But I don't think beyond that this is for me. And she was gutted because she was like, God, you say that when someone reaches out to you, you reach back. Where are you? Why aren't you coming for her? But it was less than a year later that I walked into that church myself, and you just don't know what God's doing and where that person's at and what he's got lined up and what his timing is. And we're just called to do as much as we're called to do, whether that is taking that person into your house for 2 months or just forcing your sister to go to church and seeing and praying for them, or just praying from a distance, or whatever it is, like sometimes, but that's in the Bible, isn't it? You can sow the seeds. You don't always get to be the person who pulls up the harvest,
Yeah.
and I think something that I've had to journey through is that at first, definitely, I was doing it for the wins. I was doing it for those stories. I was doing it because I wanted someone to stand up at their wedding and say, and if it weren't for Lauren, all of that stuff.
She's
But
my
actually,
hero.
yeah, yeah, that's it. I thought that was it. But actually, as I grew in maturity and in faith and in the sort of journey of leading that recovery course, I realized, no, like if I do it for those reasons, I'm never going to get the praise that I think I need or deserve. I have to be doing this for God. I have to be doing this for Jesus, because if my expectations are that I'll see the fruits of this, then that's wrong. And I remember really clearly getting down on my knees and saying, before the next course that started, I pray that everyone here has a radical encounter with you, Jesus, that they find full freedom, that they get clean and sober, and they never use my name when they talk about it. And that was it. It genuinely hurt to pray that. It genuinely hurt, but it was right, because when they tell that story, they have to be saying Jesus. People cannot think that their recovery is dependent on my involvement in their lives, because it's not, and as much as I want to be everyone's hero, but that was an agonizing prayer for me, but it was the right one. And somebody did at someone's baptism, they stood up and they talked about their recovery journey, and they didn't mention that they had been on the course or that I had been involved at all. And I remember thinking, this hurts, but it's right,
Yeah.
because they just talked about Jesus, and that's always got to be right.
Speaking of deliverance, and we know the Bible, John 10:10 says that the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Do you see a real spiritual dimension in these people that are just engulfed in this warfare, the trauma of their lives?
Yeah, definitely. And it's there's a biblical scholar who I really like to quote, and I don't quite quote him right, so apologies if someone knows this quote and they can tell that I'm doing it wrong. But his name's Alec Motyer, and he says, when saying no to sin would be easy, it doesn't feel important. By the time you realize how important it is to say no to sin, it's not easy. And that's very much addiction. Early doors, you could say no to that drink or that drug or that gambling or whatever it is, that pornography. But actually, it's like, well, what's it going to hurt once or twice? It's by the time you realize it's not once or twice, it's really important now for my life that I step away from this, that you can't. And it's that spiritual foothold that can be allowed in by something like, what's the harm? Can open just a crack, a door that I believe the enemy will pull his way into, and it can take root really quickly. It can fester, and that's really hard and that's awful. But actually, what I like about it is that there's a solution to that. That's not game over. You're on the dark side now. If you bring that into the light, and I remember, I think it was my vicar, my pastor, who said, to ruin darkness, to get rid of darkness, you only need a tiny bit of light. That's it. So if you bring it into the light, whereas if you want something to be pitch black, you need to get rid of all the light. You don't need to get rid of all the darkness to ruin it. You just need to put a bit of light in there, and then you can see. So bringing what was in the darkness into the light, that's such an invitation. That's such a gift. And that's the gospel message, isn't it? He died so that we can do that. He paid the price. So even if it feels like it's plunged in darkness, even if you're like, that foothold is well and truly been handed over, if you feel like you've gone too far, or you've done too much, or you've sinned against God too much, actually there's always a way back. And I can't remember the Bible verse, but God sent his son to the world not to condemn the world, but to save the world, and that's amazing. That invitation to be saved, to experience life in its fullness through the freedom that Christ died for. Like we're never going to get another gift like that,
Yeah. I've had many friends that have gotten clean, got clean for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. and then they just relapse and they go on a downward spiral again. And your experience, what are some of the triggers that people can be aware of that are on a journey of health, of
Yeah.
redemption, of
Mm.
that, something just pop, it just sets them off, and
Mm.
all of a sudden they're back doing, and it's like it, they have extra guilt now, they have extra remorse. It's like, oh, I was doing so good, for
Yeah.
all these years, and here
Yeah.
I am back again, and they end up having to go back into rehab, and then
Yeah.
a couple of years later they go into rehab again, and
Yeah.
it seems
Yeah.
like a cycle.
Yeah. And it's there are a few things, there are the things that will happen in the world, anything that's difficult to process emotionally, like a breakup or the breakdown of a marriage, or issues with something to do with your children, so, losing your job, being bereaved, having someone near you die. All of those things are really difficult to cope with, and they involve heavy emotions and intense emotions. And actually, if you've previously fallen back on a mechanism of ignoring those emotions through drugs or alcohol or anything else, then it's easy to kind of fall back to those things again. So it's a case of making sure that you have a good support system for when things go wrong, that mean that you
Mm.
don't feel the need to go to that place. But also, it's important to watch out for when things are going too well. And I think that, like extreme happiness, extreme excitement can sometimes make you think, oh, it'd be quite good to have a drink now. Maybe I'm fine. There's nothing going wrong in my life. I'm fine. And I think one of the biggest ones is complacency, is forgetting your vulnerability, is
Mm.
forgetting your weakness, is forgetting that you have to surrender and hand over and let God fight your battles for you. Because actually, when I fight myself, I always lose. But when God fights for me, that's when I win. And I think, yeah, I think that I think that people get a bit of distance from the real pain of active addiction, and they can really easily go like, I think maybe I'm okay now, and I've seen it as well, and it's heartbreaking. Like, actually, I can have a couple of drinks. What's the problem with that? And then suddenly they are using drugs again, or drinking heavily again, or just getting drunk, and actually it is a problem. And yeah, and that I think is what people often say in recovery, is that relapse starts way before you pick up a drink or pick up a drug
Mm.
or pick up whatever that behavior is. And I would say, if there are 100 steps from in a really strong, great place with your recovery to relapse, ideally, if you've taken the first 10 steps, it's time to kick into gear and say, okay, why am I finding myself enjoying unhealthy things again a little bit too much? Why am I thinking about this a bit too much again? Why am I trying to get attention? Why am I feeling quite proud? And it's those things. And now those things kick in way before you have your drink. But it's the unhealthy patterns and mindsets. And if you can feel them creeping back in, it's time to pick up the phone and speak to somebody who you're accountable to, somebody who can pray for you, somebody who's in recovery, who can relate and chat to you and check in with you and those things. And it's time to pick up some of those tools of recovery and make sure that you're in a really strong place.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I saw that read that the community is very important.
Yeah, big time. I know so many people who are in recovery, like hundreds, but I don't know a single person who did it on their own in isolation. I don't think we're built to be able to do something so heavy on our own. And that's why I think when I hear someone, either someone in recovery, in established recovery, say, I need help now because this is getting really difficult for this patch, this stage,
Mm.
or hearing someone who is in active addiction say, help me, is honestly the most powerful thing I've heard. And is such strength in it. It's so, I think people think that to ask for help is weak, but actually it is so brave, so courageous, so strong to say, to acknowledge, this is something I can't do on my own, and I just think everyone, everyone who's struggling needs to be able to do that, have a place where they can do that, whether that's through church, through charity, through community, family, friends, even sometimes a doctor, wherever you can find that support, you should reach out and find it.
Mm-hmm. I was reading your book, and on the part, I think you had a relationship for about 3 months, and he broke up with you, and you said to yourself, there was be nothing like a all night binge drink alcohol to put the pain. Of course, you didn't do that, but I thought it was really very transparent. Is that thought? We have those thoughts first, and that leads to our actions. But
yeah, no, I remember really clearly saying to a friend, I was like, I could drink now. And actually that happened during the pandemic where I was locked away and I couldn't see my friends. I couldn't have that personal, physical sort of contact with a friend. I couldn't have a hug or anything like that. And I just thought, well, I could get drunk. And I remember saying to her, and she said, don't you dare. She said that this is not worth your recovery. I will come over and I'll sit on your doorstep and, and you will not. And sometimes you need someone to take a firm hand with you. I don't think I would have, but what it is actually is I enjoyed entertaining the idea of doing it. In my misery, I enjoyed playing it out in my head, thinking about it, basking in, oh, well, then he'd be sorry, or then they'd realize how much this hurts if I did something drastic like that. And actually that, and it's a human thing. We catastrophize. We think through like, oh, what's gonna make the biggest impact. And obviously I didn't act on that, but recognizing that that's a really unhealthy thought pattern, really unhealthy, that needs addressing is actually very important, and then finding someone that you can express it to in a safe way, that's
good. Well, moving on to your book here. This is, tell your listeners, you want to get a copy of this, Lauren Windle, Notes on Love. We'll put this in the description box. Being single and dating in a marriage-obsessed church.
It's on a different topic to the one we've been talking.
Yes, we're shifting here, folks. Hang with me.
I just found it. I found that there are lots of people who are single in the church and in the church community that I'm in, and it just felt like they weren't feeling recognized. They were feeling a little bit like second-class citizens in their church, that actually they would, be on a different level. They would be more respected, more senior if they had a wife or a husband with them. And that felt like a real shame, because there's such potential in people who are single. And, Jesus was single, John the Baptist was single, Paul was single. I felt like everyone thought that they were in this race to get married and then everything would be better. When really, marriage is a real challenge. It comes with great things, but it comes with challenges, as does being single come with great things and come with challenges. And we have this whole generation of people who think marriage is going to solve everything. And that's going to be a really nasty shock, because actually, it's quite confronting to spend that much time with someone who can see your best and worst things. But also, what a shame for people who've decided to commit to being single. Could be people who are same-sex attracted. It could be people who feel that is what they're called to. It could be some people as well who would really like to get married, but circumstances mean that they haven't met somebody yet. And for them to feel like they're sort of condemned to a life of loneliness, and that they won't be respected in the same way, I think is a real shame. So it was kind of like, no, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the fact that, being single and dating are two equal but different states that come with their own perks and their own challenges, and one isn't better than the other. And that felt like a really important thing to acknowledge.
It's like we've created kind of a church within a church. The way a lot of churches are structured, we're going to put all of the single people over here and, all the married folks over here. And I think if you look at it from a biblical perspective, that's just not biblical. As I see the New Testament church, I think they were all doing fellowship They were all doing community, church, and faith. They were all doing it together. There were not separate departments for single people or teenagers. It was all, they were all learning from each other together.
Mm,
And
mm,
just my opinion, I think that we probably kind of missed the mark on this by separating everybody. And so the single
mm.
people are not being able to learn from maybe some older married people because
Yeah.
they don't see them at church during the time. There are different hours. They go here and there.
Yeah, and like attracts like, and my church has got 4 different services, and at
Yeah.
the one that's at 5:30, that's all the people in their 20s and 30s who are single.
Yeah.
But it's you really miss something if there isn't cross-generational
Mm.
relationship, if you're not in relationship with people with children, people without children, people who are married. Actually every different life stage has something it can teach you, either because you're going to move into that life stage, or just because it's a different set of experiences that will inform how you relate to people. Even though it's not going to be you personally who lives that, it's valuable for you to walk with people as they do, and I think a lot of people who are single kind of just just feel that they have to accept that they're not a part of the family, that they're on the outside, and partly sort of just speaking to those people and saying that's not the case, get involved, you're so welcome. And also partly speaking to everyone else and saying make sure they know they're welcome. There's effort on both sides, and I think, yeah, and I think that we're talking about it more and that we're growing in it, but there's lots more thought that could be put into that, into how we integrate and create that community which doesn't segregate people off.
Yeah, I think some of the ideas you have, like married couples hosting, having,
Yeah,
maybe, make it 50-50 or very close to 50-50. It's made
yeah,
me and my wife think about that to where, hey, let's invite 5 young men, 5 single women over and, do a barbecue or what have you, just to
yeah,
let them kind of interact. Not that we have to be the center of it all, but we could kind of be the host. And share with
yeah.
us some of the ideas. I know that's one of them that you have. Some of the ideas that if people in the church wanted to,
Well, I think it's really important that the teaching reflects the fact that not everyone in the church is married. And often, often churches are led by married men, and their sort of points of reference can be, oh, my kids did this, or my wife said that. And actually, for people who are single and maybe would prefer not to be, and are actively dating and looking to try and meet someone, that can be quite difficult. So creating those kind of, making sure that it's a space that takes into account, doesn't stop making those comments because they're important and people do relate to them, but takes into account that there's a real breadth of experience and life experience, and some things won't be relatable to everyone. I love the idea of, as you say, married couples, not just socializing with married couples, but hosting a barbecue and just getting a group of different people together. And actually, some people really want to be set up as well. Some people don't like that, and that's totally fine. But to offer and say, like, oh, I've met someone great. Do you mind if I introduce you? And putting a bit of thought into the way that you do that, that's lovely. And actually, even if those 2 people don't end up dating or in a romantic relationship, they'll feel really cared for because you've thought of them as individuals, and you've put some thought into that. Also, one thing I think is a really important distinction that a lot of people don't think through is the difference between hospitality and entertaining. And actually, if you've got a family home, right, and you've got kids, and it can get a bit messy, it can get a bit chaotic, for you to have people around to dinner can feel like a real strain, because you've got to tidy the whole house. It's like, oh, you're not just gonna sort of chuck some food in. You're gonna do maybe 2 courses, 3 courses. You'll do a nice dessert, and when they come in, you'll take their coats from them, and then you've got to do all the washing up afterwards, right? And that's amazing, and it's lovely to have somebody entertain for you. But actually, hospitality is saying, like, come in, the door's on the latch. No, we haven't particularly cleaned for you. We've got a big pot of food. Grab yourself a spoon, put your own dish in the dishwasher. And people think that they're being rude if they do that they're not showing hospitality. As a person who's single, who doesn't live in a family unit home, to be invited into someone's family unit and be treated like family is really special. And that means you pull your weight. And it means that people laugh and joke with you. You don't have to set up a meeting 2 weeks in advance. You can just say, oh, I'm around. Can I pop by? And they're just welcome. And, oh, what's on the telly? We're watching this movie tonight. And that's great, And actually, it's really important for single people to have a haven where they can do that. Somewhere where they're just welcome like family, where they can open the fridge and help themselves. That sort of hospitality is really special. And I think we need the entertaining, but we need the open door policy as well. For one or two people, I think every single person should have somewhere they can do that. And for me, that's my sister and her husband's house, and their 3 wild, chaotic kids, and I love it. And if I turn up, she'll be like, great, here's the baby, or great, you stir the pot, and I'm part of it, and it's great. And also, I think every family unit who live in a family house should have a couple of people who know that they can just turn up and it's okay. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I think that's really special.
Yeah. I know we have a young man that I really like, and he comes over occasionally, and it's just nothing. I mean, maybe, hey, let's just order a pizza. I'm not, I'm not cooking on the grill, or the wife's not cooking or anything like that. It's just a spontaneous deal. Let's order some pizza and, get some vegetables or whatever, salad. So.
Yeah. And that's really, that is just as, if not more special than when you've made the whole effort and things like that, because it feels like a warm welcome, and that's amazing. Great.
Well, you're involved in a lot of things that set, I don't want to say set people up, but I know third wheel dating is one. I've watched some of those videos, and so let's just kind of go down the line on. Let's just go down the line on some of the things that you're trying to do as a ministry,
get the people together.
to a ministry to try to maybe connect people. And as you say, it doesn't have to be a home run every time you bring 2 people together, but those
If my
videos,
success
there's
rate,
something else to watch on the third wheel. I would encourage, try to put a link in the description box on that too, so people can see what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if my success rate for getting people into established recovery was 10%, my success rate for setting people up is like 2. I'm rubbish. I'm rubbish at spotting people and knowing who's going to meet. So I do the setups, and I do introduce individuals when I feel quite strongly that they've got a lot in common. But what I found is more helpful than that is getting 8 single guys and 8 single girls in a room, because then you don't have to sort of cherry pick and hand pick who's going to like each other. And because the people surprise you. There are people who end up dating, end up getting married, and you're like, I wouldn't have even thought you'd be friends, but there's something here that works, and it's amazing. So I think you have to basically create the space. And there are several ways that I do that. One is that I work with a Christian dating app called Salt, which has launched in the States, and I'm not sure if it's available in Texas. Oh, I think it is. But anyway, it's growing, and hopefully
And what is it called again?
It's called Salt.
Salt, SALT.
Yes. Yeah. So salt and light, and adding salt to your sort of dating and that sort of thing. And that really encourages Christian dating, and the format there as well. So it's 2 people that we've handpicked that have something in common, something that we think may be a good foundation for a relationship. And then I go on the date with them, which means that I wind them up a little bit, and I make it a bit awkward, and I try and be a bit funny, but also, and they each bring like a snack that that's something they love, maybe something they grew up eating, or from a different Italian or something, they'll bring a lovely Italian snack, and that is a good point of contact. And we ask a few questions about their faith as well, so that they can sort of learn a little bit about how important that is to each other. And then we want to acknowledge that dating is difficult, and people often you'll go on a date and it won't be a hit, and you won't feel that it's the right thing to pursue romantically, but that doesn't mean that you haven't seen something amazing in that person. So each person, before they say if they want to continue dating, will say something like incredible that they've spotted through the conversation with the other person, and just call out the gold in them. And that's a really special moment, where they sort of affirm each other like that. And then they say if they want to see each other again, and if they don't, then we'll put there's a link at the bottom of the video, so that if they didn't end up being a match and you quite liked that guy or that girl, you can drop them a message and ask them out yourself, which is really fun. And one person, the first show we ever did, the guy on there, they ended up not matching, but somebody reached out to him, and they're now in a lovely committed relationship. And we're really hoping that we'll get our first marriage from them. Yeah. And we've got a few people who are now in like amazing, committed, godly dating relationships off the back of the show. So that's been great. But that's quite intensive, and that's all filmed, and not everyone wants that. So sometimes I just set people up externally off camera. And we also host these dinners with a few friends of mine, where we'll get sort of 12 Christian men, 12 Christian women, and we make sure that they're sort of compatible with each other. And we'll actually pick up the phone to churches and say, like, we want to connect across churches, and we'll say, like, who have you got that's worth meeting? Do you have any amazing women who maybe there aren't that many men in your church for them to date, or they maybe actually just only have friendship in your church and would like to date outside of your church? Bring them along. And the network has just grown and grown, and we call it Connecting Christians Living Parallel Lives, because you could be in one town or one side of a city going to a church with your group of 10 friends, and there could be the same people on the other side or in a different town going to their church with their 10 group of friends. And there's no reason you all can't be friends together, but you just haven't met. So we're sort of connecting the parallel lives in the hope that will lead to great friendship, great community, and also more dating opportunities. And the final thing that I do is I organize little retreats and trips where we'll get Christians together. And it's mean, I always make sure that the women have the best bedrooms. And then the men are in the sort of bunk bed dorms, and the women have got like an ensuite bathroom, which is really horrible. But no, it's always really fun. And we'll go to like a farmhouse or something like that, somewhere out in the country. Try not to make it too expensive, and we'll all cook together, and we'll do fun activities like we did at the sort of laser quest thing, where you get the like laser gun and you have to like run around a forest, and you're in teams and stuff like that. Just really silly, really fun opportunities to connect and cook and eat together, and we pray together and stuff like that. And actually people have ended up in relationships after that time. And what's great about that is that often people can sit back and they can feel a bit intimidated in a dinner or on a date. But when you've got 3 days, like a long weekend with somebody who maybe wouldn't have shone because they're a bit introverted, or they don't, they're not life and soul of the party, people really get a chance to get to know them and see their heart and see the great things about them. And that extended time, I think, is really important when it comes to dating.
Yeah. Well, your book is certainly turned into a ministry for you. Again, I'll hold this up here. All of the great things that you're doing to try to find mates for people. That's exciting. It's fun. And yeah.
And it injects some hope. I think people often feel quite hopeless around dating, particularly if they've had a run of maybe being rejected, or going on a date that actually wasn't very enjoyable, or they've asked a few people out and they haven't wanted to date them. So getting people to a stage where they're enjoying being single and enjoying the process of dating, I think that's really nice. That's really special.
Yeah, I think like the scripture says, so many times I think single people are so anxious to get married that they lose the contentment and to
Mm,
enjoy the moment. And,
mm,
there's so many freedoms in being single. If
mm.
I think back, if I wanted to go do something, I just went and did it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And if you want to spend your money, you don't have to check with anyone else in the house. And if you want to up and leave and go and see someone, you don't have to check diaries or anything,
Mm,
and whether it's for now or forever, what a shame if you don't enjoy that incredible freedom and opportunity. And that's not to say that,
yeah,
being married and combining finances and having a family and having to be in a certain
mm,
place isn't amazing. But I think most people I know who have now gotten married and had kids are like, oh, I wish I just enjoyed
yeah,
those moments more where I could just put the telly on and no one would disturb me, or
yeah,
I could read or listen to something and I wasn't needed. I didn't hear my name shouted the whole time. So yeah, it's important to enjoy the real privileges of being single for sure and enjoy that season.
yeah. Whether we're single or we're married, enjoy the moment, live life to the fullest. As you say, it's a
Mm.
special day. Don't hold back the china, the good china. Break out the good china every day
Yes,
in your
yeah,
book. So yeah, there's
exactly.
just so much great stuff in this book, folks. Whether you're married, whether you're single, this would be something that you would like to read to incorporate a ministry for yourself, or even something if you wanted to pursue it even more, starting some type of a program, or just doing something once a month for singles, having them over to your house. A couple of married couples get together and do something like that. So, Lauren,
Mm.
you are exceptional. God
Oh,
bless
thank you
you.
so much.
Uh,
What an
thank
honor to have been invited to speak with you guys. Yeah, thank you so much. I've loved
well,
it. What a great chat.
yes, I've enjoyed my time. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.